Welcome, everybody, to Facts on Friday. Today is January 28th, 2022. I'm Jesse Zerwell here with Misty Winston. And as per usual, we have a raft of stories to get through from this past week. So we'll get started with some Assange news.
Yes. And I feel like I've talked about this like a gazillion times this week, but it is important. So we do need to cover it again for those people who maybe have missed the other appearances or other people talking about it, because it is huge news. So on Monday, there was an announcement made that the High Court was going to grant leave to appeal to the Supreme Court. So basically, what this means is the High Court recently ruled in favor of the United States, saying that, that Julian Assange could, in fact, be extradited. So obviously, the Assange defense team came back at that, and they issued 3 points of law that they wanted to challenge. And the High Court has since then ruled that they have leave to appeal based on one very narrow point of law that they find is in the public interest. So what that means, that doesn't mean that the appeal has been granted yet. That means that Assange has the right to request the appeal from the Supreme Court. So they had 14 days from Monday then to enter in the appeal to the Supreme Court. And then the Supreme Court will make a judgment. We don't know when. There's really no timeline. I think on the website, it says that it generally takes about 8 weeks. But it could be sooner, it could be much later. We don't really know. So the point of appeal, or the point of law that they allowed to be contended, was basically that, as you guys may remember, after January 4th, Julian Assange, it was denied bail or denied extradition. So the Judge Vanessa Braitzer ruled against extradition based on his mental health. Following that loss to the U.S. prosecution, they decided that they were going to enter in quote unquote assurances because she essentially denied extradition because he is a suicide risk, and the prison system in the United States is so oppressive that she felt like it would be cruel, which is absolutely accurate. So after they lost, they decided to enter in these assurances to say, oh, but we'll be nice, we promise. Which is ridiculous on the face of it. So, but then the High Court then ruled that those assurances were in good faith, which is absurd. Everybody knows that, first of all, if you read the assurances, there are loopholes in these assurances. So it basically says, we promise not to be mean to him, but if he does or says something that we find to be, dangerous or threatening to national security, then we can go back on that. We can change our minds and we can put him under special administrative measures or throw him in ADX warrants. So the assurances are crap. Not to mention the fact that any judge that takes seriously the assurances of a country who was just revealed to have been plotting to kidnap and murder him, that's ridiculous. Obviously, these assurances mean absolutely nothing. So, but that's where it stands right now. I'm not going to get too far into the weeds about this because we do have a ton of other things to talk about. But I just wanted to make sure that we touched on it during the show. So the defense team, I'm sure, is working currently on the appeal that they will be presenting to the Supreme Court. Again, we don't know when the Supreme Court will rule whether or not they are choosing to hear the appeal. I mean, I don't like to make predictions, especially not in this case, because nothing about it makes any sense. But I'm guessing that they're probably going to hear the appeal because this is just another method in which they can kick the can down the road. They want to drag this out for as long as possible. So they'll grant the ability for him to appeal. Then once they say, yes, we'll hear your appeal, it will then go back into a waiting period of when they'll hear the appeal. And then there will be another waiting period for when they make a decision. So this is, again, Julian Assange being stuck in Belmarsh for even longer, for no reason whatsoever, on remand. And he's dying. I mean, he had a mini stroke on October 27th. That's one of two that he's had. And he's not in good health. So we need more noise. We're going back in April to DC. If you guys can meet us in DC or host another event in your area, we would love to see that. We need more noise. We need more phone calls, more emails, more pressure put on politicians, all of those things. So yeah, that's where we stand on Assange right now. If you guys have questions, let me know. I may not have the answers, but I can certainly try to find them. But it is kind of just depressing.
Case study in systematic torture.
Yes.
And the way that these so-called justice systems will, as you said, kick the can down the road to give the illusion that the mechanisms of justice are working out as they should. And
Yes.
they're absolutely not. all of this is arbitrary. He should have been set free long, long ago. He should
He
have
should have never
never
been arrested.
exactly. He should have never had to take shelter in the embassy, and there never was a case against him. There is no case now, and
And
it's
whatever little case that they may have had has completely disintegrated over the past year. We had Siggy Thorderson come out and admit to the fact that he had fabricated his testimony. He's a convicted child molester who the FBI decided to work with to make shit up about Julian Assange so that they could go after him. You had the UC Global case, which was where Sheldon Adelson funded a Spanish security firm to spy on Julian Assange. Everything that he was doing, they had microphones in the women's bathroom. So his legal conversations with his defense team, his medical conversations with his doctors that he was able to have in there, all of his visitors, all of that stuff was spied upon. And now Max Blumenthal exposed a lot of stuff, but then also Yahoo News got testimony from 30 different unnamed but intelligence agency sources where there were plots to kidnap and or murder him. And so that any one of those three things should have had this case lit on fire. This case, I say that very loosely because they don't have one, but it is ridiculous that this is still being allowed to continue at this point. And again, I've said this a million times, we are not going to see justice through the legal system. It's not going to happen. It is going to take mass public pressure. We have to make it politically untenable for them to continue this case, period. That's the only thing that will stop it. So that's why we need more noise. Lots of people. We need lots and lots of people.
It's a crucifixion at this point is what it is.
Yes. And it's not just about Julian Assange. This is about silencing journalists everywhere, setting a precedent and causing a chilling effect over the globe. And it's working. It has worked. But we have to, try to fight back against it and reverse this kind of nonsense. It's just full on nonsense. So yeah, there we go. That's where we stand on Assange. So depressing, you guys. I'm tired.
More to come.
Yeah, I'm tired. 3 years. It'll be 3 years in April that he's been in Belmarsh. And he spent 50 weeks serving an actual sentence for the bail jumping, which was also bullshit. But that has long since been over. And ever since the end of that 50-week sentence, he has been held solely on remand. So without charge, he is just being held because the United States says so. There's absolutely no reason. I would like to see a lot of pressure being put out there for bail. Because even if this ridiculous case is going to continue, there's no reason why this man should be held in Belmarsh for 1 second longer. Not a reason at all. He has no history of violence. He's a journalist. He's not a terrorist. He's not a murderer. He's just some dude. We're in the middle of a lockdown. Like everything's locked down. Where's he going to go? Where's he going to, you know what I mean? Where's he going to go? He's one of the most recognizable people on planet Earth. So the idea that he can't be released on bail and put on house arrest in the UK until this process plays out is absurd, especially given the fact that he has suffered so many serious health conditions over the past 6 months to a year. And that's only going to continue to get worse. So I would love to see some more pressure put on for bail in addition to freeing him, because yes, that should be the ultimate goal, is getting the charges dropped and setting him free. But in order to save his life, he needs to at least be put on bail.
Absolutely.
Okay. So there we have it. There's Assange. Excuse me. So moving from that, you guys have probably seen this. It's been all over the tweeters. But today there was a really dramatic bridge collapse in Pittsburgh. So I'm going to bring up some pictures for you, because the reason why I wanted to cover this, I tweeted about it earlier. Just recently, Joe Biden tweeted that he wants to end weight restrictions for bridges.
Do you want to touch on Alex Saab?
Oh,
before this?
I did want to do that, didn't I? It's a good thing you're here. Yes. Okay. So I have been wanting to cover Alex Saab because this is another thing that doesn't get any coverage. He's also a political prisoner. So a lot of people have requested. I asked you guys on Twitter today what you wanted us to cover, and that was by far the most popular choice that was given was Alex Saab. So if you guys don't know who Alex Saab is, I have kind of it's hard to find like a really good, concise explainer. So I found one through Mint Press, which is pretty good. So we'll go through that first. So this is Nar Adley and Alan McLeod, who are both amazing. You guys should definitely be checking out their work. So this is from, doesn't have a date that I see. Oh, here we go. November 30th, 2021. So this is relatively recent. So on Wednesday, November 24th, Mint Press News editor-in-chief Nar Adley sat down to speak with Camilla Saab, the wife of imprisoned Venezuelan diplomat Alex Saab. Saab was on a diplomatic mission to Iran in June 2020, where he was tasked with securing deals for food, medicine, and personal protective equipment. His plane stopped off in Cabo Verde, a group of islands off the west coast of Africa, for a routine refueling. He would never finish his journey, as on orders from the United States government, local authorities stormed the vehicle, forcing him off the plane, an event that would begin his 18-month detention. Quote, "I never imagined that Cabo Verde was going to kidnap a diplomat," end quote. Said that, hold on, buddy. I'm sorry, child. Okay, honey. Thank you. The mail came. She's very excited about it. She always gets excited about the mail. Sorry, guys. So said the Italian-born former model and mother of two. American prosecutors have accused Saab of defrauding the Venezuelan government out of hundreds of millions of dollars meant for a social housing project, claiming he sent the money to U.S. banks. While most of the charges against him have already been dropped, the most important one remains, and he faces 20 years in federal prison if convicted. Whether or not the allegations are true, it is surprising indeed that the U.S. government suddenly cares about financial crimes hurting the Maduro administration. Washington has frozen assets belonging to the Venezuelan-owned Citgo service station group that has previously seized and sold Iranian oil bound for Venezuela, an act some have labeled a flagrant case of international piracy. Saab is currently being held in Miami, where, according to Camilla, he is not receiving any medical care. Saab is a cancer survivor, but is not receiving his medication. His wife is worried for his health, but remains focused. Quote, "Alex is a fighter and he will never give up. He is a very resilient person and he is very strong," end quote, she said. While much of the Western media has downplayed the affair, Saab's case has become a cause celeb. So, okay. Inside Venezuela, with walls everywhere festooned with posters and graffiti demanding the U.S., quote, "free Alex Saab," end quote. Quote, "I really cannot express the gratitude of my family for the incredible support of, that the Venezuelan people and the government is showing to us. Alex is very grateful for all the support. It is amazing to see how the people are supporting me," end quote, Camilla Saab told Mint Press. Saab's case is another example of the U.S. government's attempts to destabilize Venezuela. Quite apart from financing opposition political parties and supporting self-declared, quote, "interim president," end quote, Juan Guaido. He's such a turd. The Biden administration also refused to recognize the legitimacy of last Sunday's regional, quote, "mega elections," end quote, that saw President Nicolas Maduro's United Socialist Party of Venezuela sweep to victory, winning 20 of the country's 23 state governorships, plus the Caracas capital district. With a turnout of 42%, a figure higher than the equivalent midterm elections in the United States, the result is certainly not one that the people in Washington were hoping for, leaving the socialists in a position of power and Guaido more isolated than ever. However, while Washington cannot choose the president of Venezuela, it can make life impossible for officials such as Alex Saab, who attempt to defy its sanctions regime. Dude. Sorry, kids, again. Sorry. Okay, so that is what's going on with Alex Saab. He is and now Daryl's here. Hello, Daryl. So he is without question a political prisoner. This is a guy who was basically helping to feed the Venezuelan people to kind of skirt around the murderous sanctions that the United States has leveled against them. So we need to have more attention paid to this. He needs to be freed. He, again, like the article says, he's a cancer survivor. He's not receiving proper medical treatment. And it is disgusting what's happening to him. And he's still in prison. And it's really depressing what is being allowed to be done to him at this point. So
and it's almost unbelievable how Venezuela and the U.S. war on it essentially has all but completely dropped off the map of corporate media in particular, when the U.S. was starting this attempted coup. It was everywhere, and of course being spun as evil Maduro being justifiably targeted by then the Trump administration. But now you hardly hear anything about Venezuela, let alone Alex Saab. And it just goes to show that these campaigns of terror by the US against other countries continue even when they're not in the corporate media. And it goes to show how disposable American taxpayer dollars are, that they're still being funneled into a war like this, which has largely been a war of economic sanctions, economic warfare, although there has been violence that's broken out in the past several years since this got started. And it also goes to show the indifference for the Venezuelan people by not just the corporate media, but a lot of independent media as well. A lot of independent media have seemingly given up on what's happening. And we shouldn't forget that people in Venezuela are still having to deal with the jackboot of American imperialism.
Yes. I mean, the sanctions are, uh, like I said, murderous. I mean, people are dying and people are starving. And so Alex Saab is somebody who was attempting to help the Venezuelan people. He was feeding people. You know what I mean? It's kind of like when Keith McHenry gets arrested 4 gazillion times for feeding people. It's insane. And just to make the point, if we weren't starving them, he wouldn't have had to feed them. So yeah, please pay attention to the Alex Saab case. There's still a concentrated effort to try to get him released. The people of Venezuela support him. Obviously the Maduro government supports him. So we need to make more noise about it because, like Jesse said, there is no mainstream coverage of this at all. I haven't heard anybody talking about Alex Saab. Gray Zone has done some great stuff. Mint Press has done some great stuff. But that's really, there's been a Venezuela Analysis has done some great stuff. But it is really... it's really difficult to find a lot of accurate coverage of Alex Saab.
Venezuela Analysis is a good resource as well.
Yes.
And let's not forget, too, that one of the key figures involved in this latest coup attempt, at least in the beginning, was Elliot Abrams, who was convicted of his role in the Iran-Contra quote unquote scandal and then pardoned for his role in that. But he is indeed a convicted criminal. And the hypocrisy of him not just being pardoned, but then being allowed to play another role in attempting to upend and destroy a Latin American country, while Alex Saab, who's trying to help the people of Venezuela, is deemed a criminal for going outside what the West, in particular the US, deems as appropriate ways to conduct diplomacy. The hypocrisy there it can't be understated.
Yeah. And I'm sitting here trying to scroll through the advanced search on Twitter to find it, but it speaks volumes about, we were talking about how they label Maduro a certain way in Western media. And there was Time Magazine. Time Magazine's the one that does like the Man of the Year thing, right? Or the Person of the Year, right? Am I getting that right? Okay. So because you get to vote, right? They put it out for the public and then you get to vote. So I tweeted about it when this happened. It was a couple years ago, but they they put Nicolas Maduro on there and labeled him authoritarian leader of Venezuela or something like that, right? And then they put Jair Bolsonaro and then just put president of Brazil. I'm like, really? You're going to label Maduro authoritarian and not the fascist? It's amazing. That's the kind of propaganda that,
Well, I think one of the top criteria for judging who gets which distinction is favorable trade relations. So
yeah,
that
it's just very telling that that's the mainstream discourse, that's the kind of information that you're going to get. And it's subtle. It's very subtle. Like that kind of stuff is very subtle. If you're just flipping through the pictures, it's not maybe something, unless you're somebody like us who pays attention, it's not something like the average person would pick up on. But that kind of stuff sinks into your psyche and you take it on board and that's how propaganda works. It's to me, that was very interesting. I tweeted it out at the time. And it's just like a really bold example of how ridiculous mainstream media is.
It's never broken down either how exactly he's supposed to be authoritarian,
No.
other than the fact that he is a popular president and wins elections. Somehow that makes him authoritarian.
Yeah, what an asshole. People vote for him. You know what I mean? It's terrible. Okay. So again, please support Alex Saab and his family. Spread information about it. Again, some resources to find is Gray Zone, Mint Press News, Venezuela Analysis. They all have great coverage of the Alex Saab saga. I'll drop the link to the article that we just read from Mint Press. Again, Nar Adley and Alan McLeod are both excellent. They do great work. We've had Alan on the show, actually. Well, on Facts on the Ground, not Facts on Friday, but you guys know what I mean. So yeah, you guys should definitely check out that article and their other work. They've done other pieces, different. I know Anya Parampil has done some great like interviews on the subject. So I would definitely check that out. She's great.
Whitney
yeah, this
Webb
is something
used to write for them.
Yep. But yeah, this is just something that we need more attention on. It's not getting near the coverage that it deserves. So that's what we're trying to do on the show, is bring up stuff that isn't getting enough coverage and try to give it a little boost. So go forth and share with your friends.
Since we're on foreign policy, should we do Ukraine next?
We can.
Okay. And then get on the domestic side.
Okay. So you want me to pull up RT first?
Sure.
Okay.
So, as most of you are probably aware, the US has been trying to provoke a war with Russia over Ukraine since around the end of last November. And every day, the tensions seem to be ratcheted up, with evidence-free claims coming from the US that Russia is about to invade Ukraine. And in fact, I don't have the link, but I did receive a update just before we came on from the New York Times, I believe it was, and it was pointing out that Lloyd J. Austin, who's the U.S. Defense Secretary, is claiming that Russia has now amassed enough troops on its border with Ukraine to invade the whole country of Ukraine. Not sure why that needs to be pointed out, other than to add to the warmongering that's already been taking place for months now. These are the types of announcements and warnings that we've been hearing for months now. So it's nothing new. Russia has continually asserted that it has no intention of invading Ukraine, but the US seems hell-bent on drawing Russia into a war, possibly through a false flag, which we'll get to in the next piece. But in this RT piece, which was published yesterday, titled "Why Are Armed Americans Operating in the Trenches of Eastern Ukraine?" subtitled "War-Hungry Armed Foreigners in Combat Clothing Are Glamorizing the Conflict in Donbass." It's detailed. What is detailed is, in particular, a group called Forward Observations Group, or FOG, and they seem quite shady based on this report. It's a longish report, so I won't read all the way through it, but it details this group and others who, on the surface, seem like mercenaries who have deployed of their own volition to eastern Ukraine, particularly the Donetsk and Luhansk regions, where much of the, if not all of the conflict has been going on since 2014. And when you get farther into the piece, you realized that these aren't so much mercenaries as war tourists and wannabe mercenaries. And they have an Instagram channel, which to my knowledge hasn't been censored. There are screenshots of their posts in this piece. And what they're doing, it seems, is essentially promoting mercenary like adventurism in eastern Ukraine, taking advantage of the situation right now between the US, NATO, and Russia, and trying to, it seems, drive volunteers who should rightly be considered soldiers to travel to Ukraine, to eastern Ukraine, and fight in the trenches along with Ukrainians who are ostensibly fighting against not Russians per se, but those in eastern Ukraine who side with Russia, for lack of a better term. And there is one portion of this I want to read because I think it really gets to the point of what's going on here, which is bizarre to say the least. And if you read this piece, which I recommend, you'll see that for yourself.
I'll drop it in the chats.
Interesting. Just scrolling down, it seems like some of the screenshots have been taken down. So let me find this quote.
I love that they have merch.
Yeah,
It's fun.
all good wannabe mercenary groups have merch.
Oh, it's funny. That's some funny stuff. I really need to have like a shirt company. As much as I love shirts, I need to just sell shirts. It would make me happy.
So, first, here's a quote from somebody supposedly affiliated with this forward observations group, detailing or giving you an idea of what they're doing there. Quote, "We've traveled to the most forward positions of the front lines, walked the trenches ourselves at one point only 300 meters from Russian-backed separatists. We got to speak to soldiers and commanders from a multitude of units, conducting a myriad of different missions in the defense of Ukraine," unquote, FOG said as it announced an upcoming YouTube video upload discussing the possible scenario of an alleged Russian invasion. So, not sure what missions they conducted, but there are other intelligence slash mercenary sources who've been speaking out about this forward observations group and giving the lie to their status or their presented status as some sort of official mercenary outfit. And this quote comes from an outfit called CIG. Quote, "Their presence in Ukraine is primarily to look cool and push their brand on the backs of Ukrainians dying," unquote, a source told CIG, elaborating on the group's activities in the region. So that was a source speaking to this other group, CIG. Quote, "Your average FOG," and that's Forward Observations Group, "your average FOG dude might give light tips to infantry in Ukraine, but nowhere the amount they need." But the first part of that quote really gets to the point of what's going on here, that these are war tourists. These are former soldiers of various ranks who seem to think that, or at least present themselves as defending freedom in Ukraine, but I don't think, and it seems a lot of others in the intel mercenary circles don't think that they give a shit about the freedom of Ukraine, of about the welfare of ordinary Ukrainians. And I think this quote, again, their presence in Ukraine is primarily to look cool and push their brand on the backs of Ukrainians dying, is exactly what they're doing. But it remains to be seen. They could very well have ties to the US government that have yet to be found out. The problem is that the situation in eastern Ukraine is so murky, it's hard to tell what's what these days. And the US and NATO have definitely been using that to their advantage. And it bears repeating that what Russia is doing is legitimately moving its military within its borders.
Yeah.
And insofar as that has any relation to US and NATO, it's in response to US and NATO provocations, those which we are seeing every day, these yarns that are literally being spun out of thin air by the West that Russia intends to invade, despite the fact that Russia has to come out over and over and over again, sometimes multiple times a day, to reaffirm that it has no intention of invading. And nobody has yet to present a good reason why Russia would invade Ukraine at this point in time or any time in the near future. But the narrative continues. There have even been commentators in the UK who think, or whether they believe it or not, they're putting the idea out there that if Russia invades Ukraine, it's not going to stop at Ukraine. It's going to
Mm.
come all the way to the UK, which is just preposterous. But nonetheless, that's the narrative that continues to be spun. And as preposterous as it is, it's very dangerous because
Yes.
it's muddying the waters of what's really happening. It's creating a web of false narratives that are inevitably going to be picked up, have already been picked up by corporate media, and are obviously being spun against Russia because that's been corporate media's obsession since at least Hillary Clinton's abysmal failure in the 2016 US elections. So it's interesting to me, and I think viewers and listeners will find it interesting, that while the US has 8,500 troops on standby, ready to deploy to Europe, should their fantasy of Russia invading Ukraine somehow materialize, that there are American wannabe mercs on holiday in Ukraine, in their words, carrying out missions and giving tips. But really, it seems, as this piece points out,
It's a
again,
branding exercise
pushing
almost.
their brand on the backs of Ukrainians dying. And it seems like these are former military
Mhm.
individuals who don't know what to do with their lives. So they
They go
are
LARP in
injecting
Ukraine.
themselves right back into a war
Yeah.
zone in which they have no business being, and
Yes.
where they do not care, again, about the Ukrainians who are fighting, and they do not care about the Ukrainian people. And it should be said too that if war does happen to break out between Russia and Ukraine, there's a good chance that both sides will meet on a battlefield somewhere and realize that they are Slavic brothers and relatives in humanity in so many other ways, and take a pause and say, what the hell are we doing here? why have we been driven to this by Western powers who are obviously manipulating us for their own ends? But I think Russia is far too smart and measured
Yes.
to take the bait. And financially and logistically, Ukraine is nowhere near prepared for a war
That's
with
all right. Joe
Russia.
Biden's going to send them a bunch of weapons and a bunch of
Right.
money.
The US has been sending quote
Hmm.
unquote lethal aid to Ukraine, which
That's such a
is
ridiculous way to say it.
a repugnant euphemism.
Lethal aid. Assholes.
Basically, parse that for yourself, but aid to kill other people.
Yeah.
So,
We're arming Nazis. Legit Nazis.
so this article I wanted to bring up to point out that as the various narratives get spun against Russia and the waters get muddied further, things like this happen where it essentially becomes a free for all. And
Yeah.
you can have these war porn tourists from the US show up in Ukraine and possibly carry out war crimes with impunity. And that's not good for anybody.
And we've seen
And
this before. I mean,
right.
we've seen this. These are, I mean, all of the, eh, we have all kinds of defense contract. You know what I mean? Like there's a really murky kind of zone there where there's a whole lot of people who are not technically military, and they're, you know what I mean? It's incredibly dangerous and gross. But that's why this tweet you said earlier, that we've been hearing about this since at least 2016. As my friend Samira says, I've been hearing about the quote imminent end quote threat of Russia taking over and annexing Ukraine for 30 years now. And it's funny that over here it says, this is what I think this happened yesterday. U.S. official says Russian troop presence is a danger, but Ukraine warns of causing panic with rhetoric. Like even Ukraine is like, calm down.
Yeah.
You
I
know?
think I think Ukraine, the government has realized that it's gotten in over its head. And
Mm-hmm.
like I said, financially and logistically, it's nowhere near prepared for an all out war with Russia. But these things continue to happen and they are dangerous, and we need to keep an eye on them because if a false flag is going to occur, it could very likely come from unaccountable individuals such as
Yes.
these war tourists. And I just want to remind viewers and listeners of a piece we covered. It might have been on the first Facts on Friday show, but it took a look at, it was a profile of an individual from the UK who traveled to Ukraine on his own to fight with the Ukrainians who are fighting the so-called Russian-backed separatists. So this is something that's been going on for a while. Eastern Ukraine has been a free-for-all zone for these types of people who want to embark on diluted uh, military adventures. But again, to that point, if a false flag were to be carried out, a false flag attack, it could very likely come from unaccountable individuals or groups such as this, which brings me to the next piece, which was published at the beginning of this week on Off Guardian, titled Pandemic, in inverted commas, Narrative Over, False Flag in Ukraine Next. This is by Gavin O'Reilly. And I'll read through this piece because it's quite short, but succinct in its analysis and in the danger it posits or anticipates could happen with regard to a false flag attack. During the past week, the world has looked on as the now 2-year-long COVID-19 mainstream media narrative collapsed almost instantaneously. In timing that cannot be described as anything less than suspect, in the same week that the World Economic Forum held its virtual Davos Agenda event, Ireland and Britain announced the sudden and immediate ending of virtually all COVID measures, and the World Health Organization called for the end of COVID-related travel restrictions, with the organization also stating that the end of the, quote, pandemic, unquote, may be in sight, in stark contrast to a recent announcement that such a prediction was premature. With the theme of the World Economic Forum's 2022 annual summit meeting due to be held in May, and the first in-person meeting of the forum since 2019 being, quote, working together, restoring trust, unquote, the optimistic among us may say that there has been an acceptance amongst the global elite that the growing awareness worldwide of the corporate power grab over public life that the past 2 years has entailed, as well as the steady march towards a digital ID system as envisaged in Klaus Schwab's concept of the fourth industrial revolution via the use of vaccine passports, has become so widespread that it is no longer feasible to continue the current COVID-19 media narrative. However, the sudden dropping of COVID-19 by the corporate media also presents the opportune moment to immediately switch its focus to something else, a possibly imminent false flag attack in Ukraine, used as a pretext for the Western-backed Kiev government to launch an attack on the breakaway pro-Russian republics of Donetsk and Luhansk in the east of the country, thus triggering an armed conflict between Ukraine and Moscow, one that has the strong possibility for worldwide ramifications. Since the end of November, the Western media, in lockstep, has promoted the narrative that Russia is planning an, quote, imminent, unquote, military invasion of its smaller Western neighbor, with Kiev having come under control of the US and EU-backed governments of Petro Poroshenko and Volodymyr Zelensky since the 2014 CIA and MI6 orchestrated Euromaidan color revolution was launched in response to then President Viktor Yanukovych's November 2013, that should be decision after 2013, to suspend an EU trade deal in favor of pursuing closer ties with Moscow. Despite the only, quote, evidence, unquote, offered so far over the past 2 months of such an incursion being the legitimate movement of Russian troops within Russia's own borders, the neocon-influenced Western media still determinedly vows that a Russian invasion of Ukraine is only a matter of days away from taking place, in a manner not dissimilar to their previous assertions that Saddam Hussein had the capability to launch weapons of mass destruction within 45 minutes in the run-up to the 2003 US-led invasion of Iraq. The claims of a Russian invasion of Ukraine also come at a time of wider tensions in Eastern Europe, with Russian President Vladimir Putin, alongside his Belarusian counterpart and sole European ally Alexander Lukashenko, being accused of attempting to destabilize the European Union via a buildup of African and Middle Eastern migrants on the Belarus-Poland border. The fact that many of said migrants are fleeing the wars and color revolutions imposed on both regions by the US NATO hegemony is right there, being conveniently ignored by the Western media. Should a false flag attack be launched soon in order to trigger a conflict between Moscow and Kiev, however, it would be a tactic with recent previous usage by the regime change lobby, which, like a theoretical war between Russia and Ukraine, almost resulted in a wider armed confrontation between Moscow and NATO. In 2017 and 2018, 2 chemical attacks were launched against the Syrian towns of Han Shaykhun and the city of Duma, respectively, both attacks being blamed by the West on the Moscow-allied government of Bashar al-Assad, and both resulting in the US launching cruise missiles and airstrikes against Syrian government targets, just stopping short of a full-scale military intervention. Indeed, the use of a chemical weapons provocation was outlined as such by Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu only last month. A false flag attack that the Western mainstream media, with its sudden dropping of the COVID-19 narrative, may soon be focusing its attention on instead. So I think Gavin here makes a very valid point and admonishes us to look out for something that could very well be coming. Although I don't think that the COVID-19 agenda is going away
No.
anytime soon. And I don't think that the corporate media, if it has dropped it in some people's perceptions, is going to keep it dropped for very long. And we'll see why that's the case when we get on to some stories later on. But this is definitely something to pay attention to because the US and NATO are increasingly becoming frustrated that Russia isn't taking the bait. And it is essentially their um, it is their signature move to launch false flag attacks when their foes, so to speak, aren't taking the bait for war. So again, something we should pay close attention to.
Oh, well, and
And
also Joe Biden's approval rating is incredibly low. And when that happens, presidents like to start wars because that, for whatever sick reason, boosts their approval ratings.
right, absolutely. And let's not forget that there was probably what was intended to be a false flag attack in 2014 with the downing of flight MH17 over Ukraine by a Buk surface to air missile. We covered that in a previous episode in the context of 3 Ukrainians and 1 Russian now being tried in The Hague for supposedly being responsible for the firing of that missile. That didn't exactly work out as a false flag attack, if that's what it was intended to be. But there is precedent for false flag attacks in this situation, uh, constantly developing between Ukraine and Russia. So we have to keep our radars tuned to this and definitely be wary if we start to see the corporate media, especially, pivot toward anything that resembles a false flag attack that could be blamed on Russia. And as this piece points out, if such a war were to kick off, whether provoked by a false flag or something else, it not just could, as this piece asserts, but very likely will have worldwide
Oh,
ramifications
yeah.
and would be, I think, quite reminiscent of World War One and the way that was engineered for the benefit of financial elites in the end, and also did a huge service to those who were interested in depopulation. So, some historical context there to keep in mind. But we'll continue to keep an eye on what's going on between Russia and Ukraine and what the US and NATO are trying to provoke, because it doesn't seem like it's going to end anytime soon. And despite Russian entreaties for diplomacy, the US and NATO seem hell bent on avoiding that at any cost. It seems like they really do want war and they're just biding their time until they can find what they consider the proper provocation to start it.
Yep. I mean, it's not like they haven't done this before. We just need to be mindful of it, pay attention to it, call it out, because it's 100% likely to happen.
And again, the real victims will be the Ukrainian people and the Russian people, neither of whom want war.
Of course not. No human being who isn't a wealthy, connected psychopath wants war. The only people that benefit from war are wealthy, connected psychopaths, defense contractors, military industrial complex, all of those people, they benefit from war. Nobody else does. War is a racket. So, yeah, this will 100% affect just the people of Ukraine and Russia. And the oligarchs won't be impacted at all. That's how it always works.
And I
And
think the US and the corporate media are getting increasingly frustrated too, because each day that Putin doesn't take the bait, it chips away at their depiction of him
as
as
like some raging lunatic.
right.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
if he were a raging lunatic, he would have invaded Ukraine
I mean,
by
listen,
now.
you can say whatever you want to about Putin, and I'm not saying that he's a good person. He's not. You don't I've said this a million times. You don't get to be a world leader and be like a good, decent human being. You have to be willing to exploit people and all of those things. So I'm not saying he's good, but you cannot deny that he has been incredibly patient
Right. And
with this.
on the world stage, on the supranational level, when it comes to the economic agendas that the World Economic Forum has put forth, for example, Russia, like China, is completely
Playing
on
ball.
board with
Yeah.
those. So,
Yeah, he's not good. I'm not saying he's good. So don't go around twisting it that I know that my name on Twitter is Comrade Misty is Putin's buddy. That's a joke. I don't like any world leaders. None of
right.
them.
But we're just looking at the facts here, and we shouldn't have to qualify
No, but
our
I do
analysis of the
because
facts.
everybody freaks out.
Right, which is a whole other problem and conversation in and of itself.
Yes. Fair play. Okay, so should we move on to some domestic shenanigans?
Yeah, a bridge
So
too
as
far.
yeah, a bridge to okay, so I shouldn't laugh because this isn't really funny. I mean, listen, nobody died, and that's great. That's good news. But today, Joe Biden was set to he is there currently, but he was set to appear in Pittsburgh to discuss infrastructure. And this morning, just a couple hours before he was set to arrive, a bridge collapsed near Frick Park. And there are some pictures here of the collapse. It is intense. The whole damn thing just completely buckled. So this is from a source who was on the scene. There are some really gnarly aerial shots that I think I saw up higher. Maybe not. Okay, so it's changing on me anyways. So the reason why I wanted to bring this up was because there just a couple of days ago, let me pull this up. So just a couple of days ago, our brilliant president, he's a real genius, this one. He put this tweet out on January 24th, so 4 days ago. When we move stuff faster through ports, when bridges don't have weight restrictions, when there's less traffic on our roads, that's how we resolve supply chain problems and get goods to people quicker and cheaper. The bipartisan infrastructure law is helping make it happen. So this motherfucker wants to remove weight restrictions from bridges.
So now I'm beginning to think that he actually writes his tweets.
No, because it would have been insulting in some way. You know what I mean? He cannot help it.
That
It
is
doesn't matter who
that
he's talking
is
to.
engineering 101 right there with regard to weight restrictions.
Do you know what I'm saying? Like this is, and then, this bridge collapses as he's on his way to Pittsburgh to discuss infrastructure. And it's like, I mean, you can't write this. I couldn't
No.
write this. It's insane. And then he goes there and of course he, oh, well, we're going to take care of this. And I mean, by removing the weight restrictions on bridges, is that your plan? Like, is that your infrastructure bill? Really? That's your plan to deal with problems in our infrastructure? That's insanity. That's Republican. You know what I mean? Like that's we're going to remove regulations. We're just going to let businesses do whatever the fuck they want. We're going to let roads. No, we don't care. We don't need weight restrictions. We don't need, who needs speed limits? Who needs any of this stuff? You know what I mean? Like and yes, Ron, it does. It sounds like Trump. Trump could have wrote that tweet, fam. Right? I mean, that could have been a Trump tweet.
It just seems so off the cuff and unthinking, and that passed muster that passed the muster of his crew, his handlers, and went out to the American public is
it's still up.
baffling,
They
to say
didn't
the
delete
least.
it. I mean, it's first of all, that tweet was insane when it came out, but then now that this bridge has collapsed, what the hell are you thinking? If that's your infrastructure bill, which I haven't looked over the infrastructure bill, to be fair, I need to do that. I still have not yet to do that. But if that's your plan, it's a bad one. That's a bad plan. I don't know why I have to say that, but that's a bad plan. That's not good. That's not a good idea. Removing the weight restrictions and, having less traffic. How exactly do you plan to have less traffic? How exactly do you plan to move stuff faster through ports? Like it's all very vague, but the whole removing weight restrictions, that's ridiculous. I don't know any thinking human being that thinks that that's a good idea.
No, they're there for a reason. They've been there since who knows when, but whenever the regulatory bodies for bridges and other similar infrastructure came into being, those restrictions have been there since then for a reason, because, and again, engineering 101, bridges can only hold so much weight at any given time. Or what happens? They collapse. And of course, the irony of this happening as he's on his way there cannot be overstated. But I am trying to look at it in the context of the global policy picture and what globalist elites would like to see with regard to the controlled demolition of infrastructure around the world and limiting people's ability to travel, whether by car or by plane. And of course, giving that a patina of reducing one's carbon footprint. But it's really about being able to control people's movement. So, of course, this is theorizing, but within that theory, it makes sense that Biden or his ghostwriter would come out with something like that, which is completely contraindicated for every bridge in the world, so far as I know.
It's ridiculous. Oh, it's so dumb. So Jen Psaki tweeted out, which we all love Jen Psaki, right? She's great. So she tweeted out, POTUS has been told of the bridge collapse in Pittsburgh. Our team is in touch with state and local officials on the ground as they continue to gather information about the cause of the collapse. POTUS is grateful to the first responders who rushed to assist the drivers who were on the bridge at the time. The president will proceed with trip plan for today and will stay in touch with officials on the ground about additional assistance we can provide. And that's okay, one way of addressing it, I guess. But I don't know. It's just, it really is just really okay. So here I just happened to come across this as I was just scrolling. So this is a tweet from 2018. I can't believe I just found this. This is a tweet from 2018. I hope someone is keeping an eye on the underside of the Forbes Avenue Bridge over Frick Park. One of the big X beams is rusted through entirely. And yes, I see the cables, so it's probably not a crisis. So this is a picture. This is from 2018.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, I can't believe I just came across that. So yeah, I mean, I don't think anybody will be surprised to know that our infrastructure in this country is garbage. Like, if you want to help the economy, we could very easily hire people to fix our bridges and our roads and all of that stuff. It needs done. There are schools still that don't have air conditioning, central air. My high school didn't have central air. There's plenty of things that we could be doing to improve infrastructure in this country that would also serve as a jobs program. It would be very simple to do. We can do it. We have the money. If we can send, money and weapons to Ukraine, if we can give the president $758 billion for more war, surely we can afford to fix our crumbling bridges. You know what I'm saying?
Or waste billions on sending testing kits, COVID-19 testing kits to every household in America.
Yes. I mean, there's plenty of ways that we could find the money to do these things. And it really it kills two birds with one stone. It helps the fact that we have crumbling bridges and deteriorating roads. I live in Ohio. Our roads are shit. They are absolute garbage. Potholes everywhere. I mean, it's terrible. And it would also serve as a jobs program. We got to hire people to do that work, right? And it's a choice. It's a political choice that we're not doing that. And this is the result of that. We now have a president who wants to remove weight limits from bridges as bridges are collapsing. And it's not, I mean, there was the overpass, was that last year? I think there was an overpass that collapsed. We're going to see more of that. This is a legitimate problem around the country. I see this kind of shit all the time in Ohio. Our roads are truly horrific. I joke all the time that the state symbol in Ohio should be changed to the orange construction cone, because it's constant. There's constant road, because our roads are garbage, and they just like do the whole like patch thing. There's patching some
Yeah.
potholes, but no, we need to completely revamp our entire highway system, our bridges, all of it. Like it all needs to be completely redone and upgraded. And made safer and more efficient. And we could do that. It is political choice that we don't. And now we're just going to choose to remove weight restrictions.
It's the same here in New Jersey.
Yeah.
I wonder if we'll find out soon enough that the bridge tested positive for COVID.
Did it die with or from COVID?
Yeah.
Oh, we shouldn't laugh, but nobody died. So I feel okay about giggling about it a little bit. I hope that there were no serious injuries. You know, I don't mean to make light of it. It's very serious, obviously.
Right. And it's obviously going to affect people's transportation
Yes.
to work, to other activities that they need to do or want to do. It's going to affect the transportation of goods, presumably. So,
Yeah, and
in one
we're
way,
not making light of it. It's one of those gallows humors moment where if you don't
Mhm.
laugh, you cry. You know?
Right,
Yeah.
right. But it really points to how dire the infrastructure situation all over this country is, and that the build for all the talk of building back better, nothing has been done, and probably nothing will be done in any kind of genuine way, such
Yeah.
as making sure that bridges are
Safe.
stable and maintained.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of the same way that, you know, when we covered Colonial Pipeline, there is no, there's no like real accountability. There's no real way of keeping everything maintained and, you know, making sure that there's, that you're examining these things on a regular basis and making sure they're in good working order and all that stuff. There's none of that. There's none of that for pipelines, for roadways, for bridges. It's all just kind of, you know, patch it up as you go along, as you're forced to, and that's it.
It would be interesting to know if the workforce responsible for maintaining infrastructure like that in Pittsburgh has been affected by so-called vaccine mandates and has experienced a shortage of workers and hasn't been able
Well, I mean,
to.
given that we just saw a photo from 2018 before the pandemic, this has been a problem for a while. I mean, I'm
Right.
sure the pandemic doesn't help, but I think that this is there was no, they've not been paying attention to this for a long time, and I don't think that anybody should be surprised by that. You know, this is not something that we focus on. We'd rather blow people up than fix our roadways and bridges. We'd rather, you know, spend a gazillion. I mean, the F-35 can't even fucking fly. Can't even fly. We've spent a gazillion dollars on that thing, and it can't even fly.
Right.
But we can't have safe bridges. Like this is, I mean, this country is broken. Like psychologically, we're broken. We're okay with the fact that we spend billions of dollars on a fighter jet that can't even fly while our bridges are collapsing. And that's something that we just accept for ourselves. And it's weird. I don't know why we do that. But we should stop. Like we deserve to have safe bridges. And we don't need an F-35. We don't need it.
I believe a lot of us don't accept it and are rightfully outraged about it, but
Not
there's
enough.
there's you're probably right, and at the same time there's not much we can do about it. We can speak out against it, but we know that the people in government are not listening to us.
No.
They've shut their ears to us a long time ago, and electoral politics in and of itself is theater. It's an illusion. It's
Yes.
a waste of time and energy. They're merely policy enforcers. They don't make policy, they just enforce policy. Our voting for them is absolutely pointless.
Yes. Yes, indeed. But Elon Musk says we should just vote him out, Jesse. Did you see that?
Yeah, well,
That's funny.
he also wants to reduce the Earth's population by sending people to Mars, so
He's an idiot. I don't know why anybody. I mean, every time I say something about Elon Musk, there are a bunch of fanboys that jump into my mentions to defend him, and I don't understand that at all. At all. What? I don't get it.
what is defensible about him?
I don't
He's
know. They try to pretend like he's this benevolent billionaire who's really doing good for the world, and he's really advancing society and all. No, he's not. Shut up. Oh, it's so weird. I don't know why people do that.
Yeah, the World Economic Forum came out citing one of the global risks we have to pay attention to over the next 10 years, or it might have been on a different timeline, but it was cited by them, and that was the proliferation of space junk. So old satellites, other detritus that's in orbit around the Earth from many space adventures past. And here we have Elon Musk shooting Teslas into
Yeah.
space.
So, for those
And
of you that didn't see it, he tweeted out, "If you scare people enough, they will demand removal of freedom. This is the path to tyranny." And I read that and I'm like, hey, I agree with Elon Musk. That's a great tweet. So then I scroll down. First question is, how do we fight back? Serious question. You want to know his answer? Vote them out. You were so close. So close, Elon. You were so
good.
close. Almost had it. You just missed it, fam. You can't
Good
vote your way
play.
out of this. Yeah. Can't
No.
vote your way out of this. Okay.
But for
So,
somebody like him who's completely removed from
yeah.
everyday reality,
Yeah, he has no idea what's happening.
yeah, it's to be expected that he would say something like that.
100%. Okay, so moving on, I do have some good news, you guys. This is amazing. Okay, so let me pull up, as you guys may have heard, or maybe not, because nobody's fucking talking about it. Truckers in Canada are kicking some serious ass. There is a massive convoy, and I do mean massive convoy. It's huge. I think somebody said it's like 50 kilometers or some crazy number, 93 miles. So here, I'll pull this up from Robert. Oh, probably shouldn't say his name. Combo Couch got a 1 week suspension for just like they were there. They just tweeted, like, put a video up of his speech. They got a 1 week suspension. So go truckers. The 11,000 truck, 93-mile long convoy is traveling from British Columbia to Ottawa, where they will hold a demonstration tomorrow. The truckers said they will not leave until the mandates are lifted. So that's amazing news, right? It's great to see that the truckers are out there, but we have some new developments, which has been really fun, which I will share with you guys now. There's a couple new developments, actually. So the first one is farmers have now joined the truckers in Canada in the convoy. So it's now truckers and the farmers, which is a lot of fun. I like this a whole lot. But not only do we have farmers joining this protest, we also have, here we go. We also have, it is spreading, and we have Italy. Italy is now joining. So they're mobilizing with Australian truckers. So they're joining forces together with Canada. No one's free till we're all free. So there's a huge convoy happening now in Italy. And not only is it happening in Italy, but it is, I don't know if that works. Did that come up right?
Yep.
Did it switch? Okay. So Brazil. So it's spreading. It's going global, you guys. So now we have Canada. We have the truckers and the farmers in Canada. We have truckers in Italy. We have truckers in Brazil. It's spreading. So I do want to say, if you are able to, you should probably stock up on some stuff. This will disrupt supply chains in a big way, which sucks. And it's scary that that's going to happen. But this is how we get shit done. I've been saying, honestly, I mean, I don't mean to like toot my own horn, but for years I have been saying that the way we get shit done is to shut down either airlines or trucking. Either of those two things, that's how we get shit done. Because that's how you shut shit down. That's how you stop things in its tracks. So this is huge news. It's amazing news. I love to see it. It makes me very happy. I hope that it continues to spread. I hope that more countries, more truckers and more countries join on. You guys, they are getting hardcore attack, though. They had like over a $4 million GoFundMe that has been frozen. They have no access to it. But people were supporting them. We need that kind of mutual aid. We need to support them while they're doing this. But their GoFundMe was frozen. I think they had a Facebook page that was shut down. So we need to, I'm going to look into it. I haven't had a chance today, but we need to find out if there's another method that we can donate to them. If there's, it's going to be difficult because all of the fundraising platforms are likely going to shut them down. But if you guys can make noise about the GoFundMe thing, lobby them to release those funds. They shouldn't be able to block that. That's insane. The GoFundMe is working now, Jade. Okay, good. So the last I heard that they had just shut it down. So if you guys can go, while Jesse's talking, are you going next?
Well, I was just going to add to what you were saying about
I'll get the GoFundMe while you're doing this.
These protests, these convoy protests, is that in Canada in particular, it has to do with the fact that quote unquote unvaccinated truckers who provide cross-border shipping, so from Canada into the US in particular, the mandate is that they have to be vaccinated because holy shit, they're traveling across a border and they're going to come back contaminated in Justin Trudeau's warped mind. And that, along with the mandatory testing and quarantining that goes along with that, is a surefire way to disrupt the supply chain, unjustifiably so. And I know in Ontario, the truckers are focused on that, but I think that as we're seeing this expand around the world, it's really focused on mandates against truckers and now farmers as well in general. And I also want to add that I saw a video of a police constable, a woman in Ontario, who voiced her support for the truckers and said that she would be taking place in a rally they were holding in Ottawa, I believe, or may have already held. So, and she mentioned in her video that she is part of a larger group of police officers in Ontario who are standing in solidarity with the truckers. So that is a good thing. That is people across the board standing up against these criminal mandates.
I just found the GoFundMe and it's over $7 million now.
Excellent.
That's crazy. Okay, so I'm gonna drop that in the chat. If you guys want to go check that out, please do.
That's in Canadian dollars as well, which is not actually. I don't know the
exchange rate.
The exchange rate, so
I know that
hold my tongue.
The pound is like when we donated to Craig Murray, it was like we raised $300, but it only ended up being like 230 something in pounds.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. Okay. So this is great news.
Yes, very good news.
It's cool to see this level of solidarity. Nobody's saying that this is fun or it's going to be easy. But I mean, at this point, I don't really know what else we can do.
And Trudeau, meanwhile, is calling these truckers
fringe.
Right.
People are trying to label this as a right-wing protest. It's not a right-wing protest. They're trying to pretend like it's about the dangerous roads in Canada. It's not about that. There's a whole lot of manipulation of the narrative going on here in various different ways. This is not a right-wing protest. It's no different than the anti-mandate protest in DC was labeled as a bunch of right-wingers, and it was not. It was right. Across the political spectrum. But that is the nefarious aspect of mainstream media and of narrative control. So, I mean, they're going to try to paint this as something else entirely. So just be mindful of that and try to push back on any of the bullshit that you may see.
Yeah. Good news indeed.
Yes.
And it had to come to this because the governments around the world on orders from above have been pushing people to this relentlessly, and people can only take so much before they push back. And it's good to see it happening in a nonviolent way, because violence would play right into the hands of the maniacs who are trying to steer us into a great reset.
And people who are taking part in this, please be mindful of the fact that they will try to push this towards violence. Do
Yep.
not buy into that. Don't allow yourself to be pulled into that. There will be agent provocateurs. They will try to come in. They will try to start shit. They always do. So just be aware of that. If you're participating in something like this, keep your cool. Keep your cool. Don't let them drag you down to their level.
Absolutely.
Because they will try. They will try. Here comes Jack. She's creeping along the table.
And I've been hearing reports about police officers, military people in the military around the world who are refusing these mandates and are standing in solidarity with truckers, are standing in solidarity with people like us. And whatever you might think of police officers or people who serve in the military, it really is something that at this point in time we have to put aside, because the fight against what we're fighting against is as big as it gets. It's really about the survival of humanity, as we've pointed out many times on this show. So we need to be in this together as human beings first. And
stop letting them divide you.
Once we get rid of the maniacs at the top, then we can go about sorting out our differences in a peaceful and humane way.
Once we deal with the system that's designed to kill us all, we can have those conversations. And frankly, I think dealing with the system that's designed to kill us all will help to remedy a lot of our differences. I think it will build a sense of solidarity and camaraderie amongst humans. But there needs to be global solidarity against empire. It's going to take all of us. We can't be nitpicky about who we're willing to stand with in this fight, because it's a big one. Like Jesse said, it doesn't get any bigger. It really doesn't. So that's where we stand.
So hopefully more of those convoys to come. Hopefully they'll grow, and we'll see how the powers that be respond. But I think they are scrambling right now, but they always have a plan B. So
yeah,
we have to keep an eye out for what's coming down.
Be ready for anything.
Yeah. What's coming down the highway, pun intended.
Yeah. All right.
So speaking of more good news, we'll move to the ocean news, unless you had anything else to add.
No, I think I'm done. Nope.
that?
I think I'm done with all my stuff.
Okay.
It's all on you now, dude.
All right. So
I'm going to sit back and just run the show.
All right. Man the ship.
Yeah. I don't know how I became the tech guy, but here I am.
So this is a piece in the Defender, as you see, which is an outlet for children's health defense, which is, I'm going to say his name because I don't want to self-censor, but Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s organization. And this piece is pointing out some news that kind of quietly came out this week. And that, as you can see by the headline, is OSHA withdraws workplace vaccine mandate after facing lethal blow by U.S. Supreme Court. And the subheader there, the Biden administration withdrew its COVID vaccine or test mandate for large employers, saying the administration recognized the emergency temporary standard could not be revived after the U.S. Supreme Court blocked it earlier this month. So this piece is lengthy. I won't read through the whole thing, but on one level, this is good because that draconian measure is gone for good. But we have to think about all the employees who, while this was up in the air, went and got injected because they were afraid of losing their jobs. And now it's
Or the
all
ones that lost their jobs because they didn't want to comply.
correct. So many people put in compromising, to say the least, positions, life threatening positions, if we're talking about the injections themselves. So, while on the one hand, this is good because, as I said, the draconian mandate is gone, there's a despicability about it in that we can see how the government is playing with people's lives. The government knows full well how dangerous these injections are. And they know that somebody deciding to get or being coerced into getting a quote unquote vaccine because they want to keep their job is completely outside of the parameters of legitimate public health. That is not what public health is about. Public health is not about getting, especially an experimental injection, to keep your job. You should never decide to receive a medical intervention so that you can keep your job or so that you can go on vacation. Those are not valid reasons. And people who've chosen to do that, I don't blame them at all because we were all subjected to so much pressure and fear and misinformation. And after being locked down, people were left confused, afraid, anxious, etc., and really thought in a lot of cases that they were doing the right thing. I thought I was doing the right thing in getting 2 injections, and now I'm paying the price for it. And as I've said before, that's why I'm so adamant in speaking out against these poisons and the mandates that come along with them and the bigger picture of what this is all about. So, I just wanted to highlight that this happened, which is a good thing. It is a victory, but we have to remember that people are still going to suffer in the aftermath of this, having gotten the injections under duress or having lost their jobs under duress. And the government, OSHA, should never be forgiven for playing with people's lives this way. It's criminal, and we need to remember that. And as I said, not forgive it when it comes down to actually holding these people accountable in a legal way, which hopefully will happen. There are being moves made to do so, which we'll get to in a little bit. I'll highlight some of those, but this happened and we'll see where things go next. The CMS mandate for healthcare workers is still up in the air, um, ludicrously so, because why should healthcare workers be subjected to mandates that other workers aren't? I think the argument that they're in healthcare settings and somehow more exposed or more at risk is a preposterous argument, especially when we look into the science of how this virus is spread, how this disease works, and the fact that these injections do not work whatsoever unless you consider poisoning and killing people working. So, moving on from there, while that carrot seems to have been dangled out by the US government, the stick comes with the FDA pausing monoclonal antibody treatments. And I'm going to read through this piece from Popular Science because it not only explains what's going on, but it's a lesson in propaganda and spin and the way it makes this seem necessary, the way it is drenched how drenched in hypocrisy it is needs to be pointed out. And that's because this is the mainstream narrative that's being put forth. And somebody who doesn't have the time for whatever reasons to do proper research will look at this and see popular science, read it, and think that this is uh, scientific consensus, that this is where things stand, that this is being conveyed accurately, and it's absolutely not. Um, on top of which, the banning of these or the limiting of these treatments is absolutely criminal. But let's get into this. It's not too long of a piece, so I'll read through it and I'll point out some things along the way that people who are listening and watching will probably pick up on themselves. But let's get to it. So, why the FDA paused monoclonal antibody treatments? Health experts are supporting limited use of two monoclonal antibody treatments after reports that they were ineffective against Omicron. And as we scroll down, we have this quite grotesque picture of somebody receiving a monoclonal antibody treatment in San Diego. We've been seeing a lot of these pictures over the past 2 years, and they always seem to be placed in a manner and chosen in a manner that not only portrays those suffering or afflicted with COVID-19 uh, in a very vulnerable uh, position that shows obvious discomfort, but it also it portrays these people as desperate and as people who've made some kind of fatal mistake by choosing not to get an experimental injection. The BBC recently did a video report uh, of a man who chose not to receive the injection because he was afraid of the unknown. That's what he said. He didn't know what it was going to do to him, and he chose not to receive it. He was diagnosed with COVID-19, and now he's in the hospital clinging to his life. And the BBC had the audacity to send one of the reporters in there and interrogate this man at his bedside and basically get him under duress to promote the so-called vaccines. It's absolutely disgusting the way that these people who are catching this virus and developing this disease are being exploited for the corporate media globalist narrative. So I'll start with this piece. On Monday evening, the Food and Drug Administration announced that it would limit the use of two monoclonal antibody COVID-19 treatments made by pharmaceutical companies Regeneron and Eli Lilly. Those treatments had been successful at keeping symptomatic patients out of the hospital in earlier waves, but did not work against Omicron, the agency said. A third, less common monoclonal treatment called sotrovimab can still be used. That may be sotrovimab. The FDA's decision, based on lab studies of the treatments, again, or I should point out, no link to the study there, mirrors the practices of many healthcare providers who had been administering the two drugs to treat lingering Delta infections, but stopped as Omicron cases dominated. So, right here, I just want to pause quickly and point out that supposedly, and as we'll see, the studies haven't been done in actual patients, they've only been done in vitro in a lab. But supposedly, these monoclonal antibodies are not effective against Omicron. What else isn't effective against Omicron but isn't getting pulled? The so-called vaccines. Okay, so blatant hypocrisy right there. Monoclonal antibodies are lab-grown versions of antibodies that the immune system would make against COVID after an infection or vaccination. They're given via an infusion, a bit like an IV drip, within 5 days of a patient developing symptoms in order to soup up the early immune response. Initial clinical trials found that when given either Regeneron or Eli Lilly's drug, an individual was 70% less likely to be hospitalized. For much of early 2021, supplies of the drug were limited, and that's because the federal government purposely stockpiled and controlled the distribution of monoclonal antibodies. It's not as if there haven't been enough to go around, it's that they've been purposely withheld by the federal government, which is a critical detail left out here. And they were given only to people at high risk of severe COVID. But by this fall, the federal government was delivering tens to hundreds, it should be, of thousands of doses per week. Some states, including Louisiana and Florida, opened state run infusion centers where anyone could come in to receive treatment. But Omicron's mutations allow it to dodge many of the antibodies that respond to earlier variants. The same goes for the lab made antibodies. If you think of the virus as a set of Legos, okay, here's the condescension to us, this childish condescension. Let me explain it to you like you're a child. So, remember Legos? If you think of the virus as a set of Legos, each antibody is tuned to grab a specific brick. Omicron has swapped out many of those bricks as it has mutated, and old antibodies might not have anywhere to bind. Sotrovimab just happens to target spots of the virus that went unchanged. And then here we go. Vaccines still prevent severe disease from the Omicron variant because they prompt the body to develop antibodies and more complicated systems like white blood cells for a whole range of bricks. Now, if you hover over that link, it links to another popular science article, not a study of any kind. And the fact remains that there is no clinical evidence whatsoever to prove that statement right there. But they're going to continue with the injection narrative ad nauseum, ad infinitum. As Omicron began to spread in the United States, healthcare providers hunted for ways to make sure that monoclonal antibodies were reaching people with Delta infections, which still responded to the treatments. That's easier said than done. Genomic sequencing, which public health researchers use to track COVID variants, takes at least a few days, but often stretches into a week, by which time the window for antibody treatment has passed. And most of the sequencing is currently done at a lower standard than the FDA requires for clinical decision making. Okay, why is that? No explanation. PCR tests used by some healthcare institutions could detect one telltale mutation on Omicron. We heard about this in the recent past, how it could detect a dropout supposedly in the Omicron strain, a narrative which has been debunked by numerous professionals and experts who know better. While others, like Houston Methodist Hospital in Texas, rolled out a test that could distinguish between strains as Omicron spread. I don't know anything about this test. This is the first time I'm hearing about it. Quote, "We did that because we felt there was utility early on in being able to say on the same day, quote, this person likely has Delta, and so they can have Regeneron, unquote, and quote, this person likely has Omicron, and they could get Sotrovimab, unquote," says S. Wesley Long, the clinical director of diagnostic microbiology at Houston Methodist Hospital. Now, with Omicron responsible for more than 99% of cases nationally, I'm going to pause right there because if you remember, maybe about a month ago now, or close to a month ago now, the CDC revised its numbers of the prevalence of Omicron in the US, and it revised those numbers down to somewhere around 23%. What happened to that? How is it 99% again? There was no announcement that a recalculation was made to up the percentage of cases nationally. Their original estimate was somewhere around 70, 80, maybe even 90%. That initially went down to around 50, 55, and then dropped to somewhere around 23. And to the best of my knowledge, hasn't been changed since then. So this statement here that Omicron is responsible for more than 99% of cases nationally is an outright lie. It's medical mis and disinformation of the highest order. Now, with Omicron responsible for more than 99% of cases nationally, the FDA argues that it doesn't make sense to use the two ineffective monoclonal antibody treatments anywhere. The emergence of an Omicron subvariant, which is news that came out this week, BA.2, has made it even harder to get the right monoclonal antibodies to the right patients. BA.2 looks just like Delta and other earlier variants on the PCR screening. This can lead to patients receiving ineffective treatment for Delta instead. Quote, "You're doing an awful lot of work to try to find the one or two Delta cases," unquote, says Long. Even before Omicron, the monoclonal antibodies weren't necessarily readily accessible to all patients, according to findings published by the CDC. A recent paper found that white patients with SARS-CoV-2 were much more likely to receive the treatment than people of other races or ethnicities. No surprise there. Amy Feehan, a co-author on the paper and researcher of the Oaksner Clinic Foundation, the research arm of a Gulf Coast hospital system, suggests that's a signal that people didn't have equal access to drugs. No shit. To get monoclonal antibodies, a person needed to be diagnosed in time and able to get themselves to treatment. The programs that were most successful at reaching patients, quote, had a whole integrated system that was very labor intensive, unquote, says Feehan. Quote, "They reached out to those patients directly over the phone if they met certain high-risk criteria, and they were able to get 91% of the people who they contacted in to get an infusion." So a lot of work, according to Feehan, but it seems to have paid excellent dividends if 91% of the people were able to get an infusion and presumably get healthy, which is a detail conveniently left out. Although the treatments were widely used in California as late as last week, people opposed to vaccination requirements have especially relied upon the drugs. And I chuckle there at the phrasing, "people opposed to vaccination requirements have especially relied upon the drugs," as in those stupid anti-vaxxers who just can't take the jab and they want to go around it and rely upon these other drugs, which are in short supply. But why are they in short supply? As I said, because the government has kept them that way. And if you hover over that link, it links to, of course, a New York Times piece. And much of this piece links to corporate media for its sourcing. Example in the next sentence, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has criticized the FDA's decision. You hover over that, and it's a Washington Post politics piece titled "Conservatives Led by DeSantis Erupt Over Another Unproven Coronavirus Treatment." So just above, at the beginning of this piece, it stated that this is a proven treatment for COVID-19. But right here, it's citing a source in its argument, this piece is, that's claiming that monoclonal antibodies are an unproven coronavirus treatment. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has criticized the FDA's decision on the grounds that the antibody therapies haven't been tested in human cases of Omicron, and Florida continued to use the antibodies up until the FDA announcement. While it's true that human clinical tests haven't been conducted yet, there is a growing body of evidence that supports the ineffectiveness of these treatments on Omicron. Studies published in December found that even when bathed in monoclonal antibodies on a petri dish, Omicron particles could keep reproducing. So that was a study published in Nature, but what's important to point out here is that an in vitro study, which is in a petri dish, and an in vivo study, which is in somebody's body in real time, there are huge differences between those. And one in a lab does not necessarily translate to what happens when these monoclonal antibodies are used uh, in someone's biology. So that is being used as the basis to limit the use of these antibodies, which are a proven effective treatment against COVID-19, is criminal. This is another act of criminality that scant basis is being used to deny people proven treatment for COVID-19. The withdrawal of the emergency use authorization does create real problems for COVID treatment. Supplies of sotrovimab, the one remaining monoclonal antibody therapy still known to be effective, are scarce. The antiviral treatment, and this really is angering. The antiviral treatment remdesivir, which was previously only used during hospitalization, can now be used in mildly ill patients, but the drug requires 3 lengthy infusions. Still, health experts support the decision. Remdesivir is a killer antiviral, and if it doesn't kill you, it causes renal failure. And the percentages of it causing death or renal failure are respectively around 25% and 50%. So that it's now being touted after being used on people who were intubated and then given remdesivir and murdered by remdesivir, as Dr. Artis, whom we played a clip of in last week's show as his father-in-law was, that this is now being touted in place of proven effective monoclonal antibodies to be used in mildly ill patients through 3 lengthy infusions is criminal insanity. And still, health experts support the decision. Quote, "You shouldn't really be using a therapy that doesn't work," says Fian. Absolutely. But the hypocrisy there is just beyond words. And never mind the injections, if we're talking about therapies that don't work. The FDA left the door open for the return of the treatments if they prove effective against future variants. More recent antivirals, particularly the pills Molnupiravir and Paxlovid, which is Pfizer's pill, Paxlovid, could in the end provide better options for patients. So now we see what this is all about. This is about opening up the market to not just Molnupiravir, which, as we'll see in the next piece, presents a whole host of dangers, but also Pfizer's new COVID-19 pill, as it's branded, Paxlovid. Could, in the end, and we'll see if there's any trial data ever made available to us on this, provide better options for patients. Because the pills can be given at local pharmacies, they may end up being much more accessible than time-intensive infusions. The Department of Health and Human Services keeps a list of providers that can fill prescriptions for the medication. But until production scales up, pills can't match the current volume of monoclonal antibody treatment, which means that for the moment, tough decisions remain about how to prioritize their use. And then I'll just point out this correction. For all the misinformation I just pointed out going through that piece, this is the one correction. An earlier version of the story misstated the last name of Amy Fian. We regret the error. No regret about the deadly misinformation that was provided, but the misstatement of Miss or Mrs. Fian's last name, that's regretful. So again, the OSHA mandate disappeared, made extinct. but the stick comes with these FDA limits, totally unjustified, based on in vitro studies, not in vivo studies. The FDA decision to limit these proven treatments for COVID-19. And as I mentioned, and as this article indicates, this is to make room for the use of Monopyravir and Pfizer's supposedly new wonder pill Paxlovid.
Yes.
Which,
And Christopher in the chat says, I heard MCAs weren't doing so well against Omicron, but that doesn't mean they should bar its use. Yeah, exactly. That should be between you and your doctor. Whatever treatment you're receiving for whatever illness that you have should be between you and your doctor.
right. And as this piece points out, studies haven't been done in human subjects. I don't like using that word, but for lack of a better term, they've only been done in a petri dish. And there are a whole host of factors that provide a suite of differences between what occurs in a petri dish and what occurs in somebody's body. And the fact that the FDA is jumping the gun and basing this limitation on observations made in a petri dish is, I'm again going to argue, criminal. So moving from there to this piece that was published in Forbes, this two-part piece, which is long but well worth the read. I won't read the whole thing, just the opening paragraph. This was published on November 1st of 2021, and it's titled Supercharging New Viral Variants, the Dangers of Monopyravir. And it's written by William S. I'm going to say Hazeltine. And who is he exactly? If you click on the link, there's a bio for him. And it reads, I am a scientist, businessman, author, and philanthropist. For nearly 2 decades, I was a professor at Harvard Medical School and Harvard School of Public Health, where I founded two academic research departments, the Division of Biochemical Pharmacology and the Division of Human Retrovirology. I am perhaps most well known for my work on cancer, HIV/AIDS, genomics, and today on COVID-19. My autobiography, My Lifelong Fight Against Disease, publishes this October. I am chair and president of Access Health International, a nonprofit organization I founded that fosters innovative solutions to the greatest health challenges of our day. And it goes on to say that he will be writing a series of focused pieces for Forbes, as he has, but in particular, this one on supercharging new viral variants, the dangers of Monopyravir, which, as we saw from the last piece, is now being pushed in place of monoclonal antibodies. If we just scroll down and read the first paragraph, it gives you a good idea of the dangers of Monopyravir and the criminal illogic of using these in place of proven monoclonal antibodies. As much as people are justifiably excited about the prospect for orally available drugs that can prevent and treat COVID-19, I believe the FDA needs to tread very carefully with Monopyravir, the antiviral currently before them for approval. Obviously, it's been approved. My misgivings are founded on two key concerns. The first is the drug's potential mutagenicity and the possibility that its use could lead to birth defects or cancerous tumors. The second is a danger that is far greater and potentially far deadlier: the drug's potential to supercharge SARS-CoV-2 mutations and unleash a more virulent variant upon the world. So these two pieces go on and get into much more detail, breaking down the points he makes there. And these are well worth reading. You can also listen to them if you would like to do so. There's that option. But
which, by the way, I love it. that that's a thing that's starting to come out now.
Yeah,
I love that.
it's very helpful, especially
Mm.
if you're in a time crunch.
Mhm.
But the point here is that this well, I don't think there he could have better qualifications to speak on this. This individual, this Harvard affiliated individual, uh, back at the beginning of November of last year, was warning against the use of molnupiravir, which is now being touted in place of monoclonal antibodies. And look, I'm not saying monoclonal antibodies are the best treatment option for COVID-19, but they've been proven to be effective. And to purposely limit those treatments first by government stockpile and now by FDA diktat is criminal. And then to promote in place of those monoclonal antibodies a drug that has potential mutagenicity, a drug that could lead to birth defects or cancerous tumors, and a drug that could supercharge SARS-CoV-2 mutations and unleash a more virulent variant upon the world, we're getting into criminal insanity at this point. And if you look above that first paragraph, the chart shows the mutations that molnupiravir uh, created when used for treatment for another pathogenic coronavirus, MHV. And you can see in the first instance, it caused 162 total mutations, and in the second, 102. And that should, at the very least, be alarming to anybody who's serious about finding safe, effective treatments for COVID-19, which we already know there are, ivermectin being one of them, hydroxychloroquine being another one. But nonetheless, the health complex, the industrialized health complex in this country charges on with diktats that make no sense whatsoever, particularly in the context of public health. This is the opposite of public health. This is only going to lead to more harm. And I don't think you have to be a doctor or scientist to see that. So, why is this being done? Well, that's a whole other conversation in and of itself. We've speculated on that before. Um, but in short, it seems to be in line with the overall COVID-19 agenda being one meant to harm populations on a large scale for various reasons, financial and otherwise. We could get into the transhumanism discussion if we had time. So definitely check out this piece, read it, listen to it, and put that up against the fact that the FDA is now touting molnupiravir and Pfizer's new wonder pill in place of proven effective treatments, and ask yourself why that's being done, and try to look at it in the bigger picture, um, on a globalist scale, why this is being done. And there are some scary conclusions you might come to or scary theories you might develop, but we have to think about these things because people are being harmed en masse and it's being done criminally. And on that note, I want to turn to just a few resources and quickly point them out, um, for anybody who might be interested in uh, people who are really fighting the good fight against this uh, injection agenda. And this first source is a website, realnotrare.com. And this was brought to my attention by one of our viewers, or she may be a listener. I'm not sure which, maybe both. She reached out to me on Twitter and shared with me that she was injured by one of the injections. She's been injured for 9 months. 5 of those she um, has been or was unable to work. And she shared with me this website, which I had heard of previously, but I hadn't gotten the chance to check out. But realnotrare.com is a site where victims of these injections can share their stories, um, and find community and solidarity, without judgment, without people trying to gaslight them, as many doctors around the world have been doing to victims of these toxic injections. You can see scrolling down the latest stories. You can see that you can share your story or read more stories. And there's an About Us section that lays out their mission, so to speak, their demands. And I want to add that Maddie DeGarry, whom a lot of you are probably familiar with. She's a 12-year-old girl who participated in one of the Pfizer injection trials. She was paralyzed to the point of being wheelchair bound by the injection and is now has to live with a feeding tube as well. And Pfizer chalked up her condition, which was caused by the injection, to merely abdominal pain. This is a 12-year-old girl, and she's been completely gaslit by the medical industrial complex, which used her as a guinea pig and ruined her life in a lot of ways. She and her mother are involved with this organization, as well as Bree Dressen, who I believe Ryan Christian interviewed on his show, The Last American Vagabond. She was severely injured by one of these injections. And she tells her story in that episode. I highly recommend everybody watch that, because these people need to be heard. These are real stories. People are really suffering, and the numbers are huge. The VAERS data is only the tip of the iceberg when it comes to conveying how many victims there are, permanently disabled victims and those who have died. And we really need to listen to them, to listen to their stories. And we need to encourage platforms like this where they can tell and share their stories. So do check this out. And it'll certainly give you a very harsh but very necessary picture of what these injections are doing to people. And the next resource I want to highlight is something that it's a video of what went down this week after the anti-mandate march in Washington, D.C. Senator Ron Johnson from Wisconsin held a panel in the Senate, and it was billed as COVID-19, a second opinion. And it was an excellent forum where doctors like Peter McCullough, Ryan Cole, Pierre Corey, Robert Malone, Richard Urso, Aaron Cariati, many, by no means all, but many good doctors who have been trying to provide patients with early treatment, who've been trying to warn about the dangers of the injections, came together, formally shared their experiences in some ways, and then went on to have a very long and intensive open discussion moderated by Senator Johnson, who's been the sole voice, it's sad to say, the sole voice in US government who has been pushing back against the mainstream COVID-19 narrative, especially with regard to early treatment and the injections. A while back, he actually hosted a panel in the Senate where victims, including Maddie DeGarry and Bree Dressen, testified or shared their stories. They were entered into the record. That can also be viewed on Senator Ron Johnson's Rumble page. It should be noted that I believe this one, or it may have been a previous video of a session that he held, was up on YouTube, had about 8 million views before YouTube disappeared it. So that's worth noting. And it's also worth watching this whole discussion. It is lengthy, it's over 5 hours in length. So probably best to watch it in segments, but very well worth watching. Um, Not all of the people who participate agree. So it's interesting to see the points of disagreement. Um, there are some on the panel with whom I vehemently disagree, especially when it comes to the injections. But the point is that this discussion is happening and needs to happen, and that only one individual in the US government is standing up for victims of these injections and providing a forum for so-called fringe doctors, at least in Lord Fauci's mind, to come together and have a civil, educated discussion on what the hell is going on and what is being done to humanity. That just one person in the US government is doing that is abominable. And it says everything you need to know about where the US government is at now, just completely out to sea when it comes to public health, despite all its protestations of caring about public health. So do watch this. Do also check out the session he held where victims were able to come and share their stories. It's very tough to get through, but again, the stories need to be heard. And we need to have a realistic picture of what's going on here, as harsh as it is. So you can find this on his Rumble page. We can drop a link in the chat if Misty hasn't done so already. And
Already done.
cool.
I'm on it, dude.
Oh, I missed something. I'll finish up with these links, and then I just want to show that clip, the Bill Gates clip on monoclonals to wrap up that short clip. But the third thing, the third resource I'd like to draw attention to comes from the Stiftung Corona Ausschluss, or the Corona Investigative Committee, which is being headed by Rainer Fulmick and Viviana Fischer in Germany. And they have been taking testimony for about a year and a half now in preparation for a trial for crimes against humanity for specific individuals involved in what's been going on over the past 2 years, including Bill Gates, including Anthony Fauci, including Tedros of WHO fame. This is from their 86th session. I believe their 88th or 89th one was just published today. And you can find their page on Odyssey. They have not only their full sessions, which tend to be quite lengthy, but well worth watching, but they also break each speaker's session up into its own video. And so you can sort through those and choose the ones you'd like to watch if you wish. But the one that was just up on screen with Dr. Mike Yeadon, this is something I mentioned in a previous episode a few weeks ago. And here he presents evidence that he and his colleagues collected going through VAERS data and looking at the adverse events recorded in there and matching them to batch numbers and showing a huge discrepancy in batch numbers and the adverse events they caused, including death, which, as he describes in that segment, which is a lengthy one, but again, well worth watching, he describes as the most damning proof yet, or the closest we have to proof yet, that there is criminal intent behind the administration of these injections, that possibly what's being done by the pharmaceutical companies is testing out doses to see what lethal levels are, although one can only speculate at this point. But please do watch that and see the evidence he presents. Michael Yeadon spent more than 2 decades at Pfizer, and is more than well qualified to speak on what he speaks on here. And he has been really a voice in the wilderness, speaking out against these insane injections. So do take a look at that. And then this one is from session 89 is the most recent. Session 88 before that, which, as you see, was on January 22nd. This segment by Thomas Roper, who is a German independent journalist, presents an amazing breakdown of just how much power and influence Bill Gates has in the orchestration of what's going on, at least on the level of coordinating the response of health agencies around the world. And I can't really even begin to describe what's presented here, but it is extremely damning evidence. And you hear from a lot of people that it's not just about Bill Gates, and that is true. It's not just about Bill Gates, but the extent to which he's involved and how he has influence, especially financial, over just about every institution that's making major decisions about how the world has responded and will continue to respond to COVID-19. It's breathtaking, and I can't recommend watching this enough. I know that RFK Jr.'s book gets into a lot of this and does an amazing job in detailing that. And this is an excellent supplement to that. So do take a look at this. I will add that the segment with Mike Yeadon is in English. This one is in German, but it has English overdubs, which can be annoying at first, but you'll get used to them quite quickly. And the information itself is compelling enough to keep you watching. So do check out those, because the work that the Corona Investigative Committee is doing is very important. I don't know if it will be successful. That remains to be seen, but they're making real moves and providing information about what's going on that we're really not getting from anywhere else, although there are a lot of good sources out there. So do check that out. And the last thing I want to play is this video of Bill Gates. This is on his own YouTube account, I believe. And this was published almost exactly a year ago, January 27, 2021. And he presents a number of things in here, but one of the things he presents in here is one of the things he does in this video is advocate for the use of monoclonal antibodies, which are now being, as we went through, pulled back under FDA diktat. So take a look at this video, listen to what he says about monoclonals, but also what he proposes for future pandemics, which he just can't wait to be implemented upon us.
Want to return to the way things were before COVID-19. But there's one area where I hope we never go back. our complacency about pandemics. We can get ahead of infectious disease outbreaks. By the next pandemic, I believe we can have what I call mega testing diagnostic platforms. They can be deployed quickly, cost very little, and test 20% of the entire population every week. We also want to get treatments out far faster next time. One of the most promising is monoclonal antibodies. These manufactured antibodies grab onto the virus and disable it, just like your immune system, and can reduce death rates by as much as 80%. I also think that we'll develop new vaccines quickly, in large part due to this new mRNA platform. mRNA will become faster to develop, easier to store, and lower cost. That's a huge breakthrough. To stop future pandemics quickly, we need to be able to spot disease outbreaks as soon as they happen anywhere in the world. And that requires a global alert system. If there turns out to be some new infectious pathogen, then we need a group of infectious disease responders to spring into action. Think of these as like pandemic firefighters. They're going to use their logistics, use their ability to build up capacity quickly. They're going to go wherever that problem is. Stopping the next pandemic will require a big investment. But I think of this as the best insurance policy the world could buy. You can read more about this in our annual letter.
Creepy
If
fucker.
that's not a psychopath, I don't know what is.
Yeah.
So-
Dude, let's just remember, he's not a scientist. He's not a doctor. He's not shouldn't be anywhere near global public health policy.
Nope. So I'd like to know what changed in a year with regard to monoclonal antibodies. I mean, we have the official narrative, but why the shift? It certainly must go beyond just rolling out Pfizer's new wonder drug, but we can only speculate at this point. But it's very telling that almost exactly a year ago, he was very keen on monoclonal antibodies, somebody who's driving so much of health policy around the world, and now monoclonal antibodies seem to be verboten. So I think it was good to end on that, to show that the goalposts are still moving, the sand is still shifting, these people, these maniacs are still playing games with people's lives.
Indeed. Just so everybody knows, before we wrap, there is a vigil tonight, 9:00. Steve Poikinen's guest hosting. Convo Couch is coming on to talk about the fact that they were just censored again. So don't miss that. We'll be doing Assange updates again. I've been talking about it all week long. This is what happens. It's just, nature of the beast. So, but we'll get a little bit more in depth as it is the Free Assange vigil. And then also, should we talk about what we're going to do next week with the NYWs? Okay, so if you guys know me, I'm obsessed with true crime. I'm fascinated by the psychology behind it all. But I reached out to Jesse this past week and asked him if he would be interested in doing a regular segment or show where we cover MMIW cases, or maybe missing or murdered Black women or men or kids or whatever. But anything, where there isn't a lot of coverage about the particular cases. As we all know, with the Gabby Petito case, there's the whole white women syndrome. We want to try to kind of get around that. We don't have a huge platform, but I mean, it gives us an opportunity to use the platform that we have to cover some of these cases that don't get any coverage. So we're going to start that next week. I don't know how often we're going to do it. Might just be like once a month until we get a feel for it or whatever. But we're going to break down some MMIW cases. There's a whole bunch of stuff that we could be talking about in that kind of realm. So that'll be starting next week. I think on Tuesday. Yes. Is that what we decided on Tuesday?
Yep.
Okay. So Tuesday we'll have one of those, the first one out for you guys. I don't know what time we're going to be doing it. We got to work out all the details and stuff. Probably noonish, maybe. So yeah, I'm really excited about it because it's something I've actually wanted to do for a really long time. When I was pondering starting doing like a YouTube channel or doing, politics or whatever, I was torn between, do I want to mess with politics? It's really stressful, or because I love true crime, I was going to start a true crime channel. So this is like a good way for me to like smash those two things together. and get some coverage on cases that don't get enough coverage. So I'm pretty pumped about it. Hopefully you guys will enjoy it. So we're going to start that Tuesday. We'll figure out what time and we'll tweet about it. And then
more stories that need to be told.
Lots. There's unfortunately a lot. So I'm pretty pumped about it. We're probably going to stick with just doing one case at a time. That way we can, give proper attention to each story, and really flesh out, everything that's happening in the case. So I'm pretty excited about it. It's weird to be excited about talking about that kind of stuff, but I'm just happy to be able to use our small platform to, get some attention to some of these things that need to be talked about more. So
yep.
I'm pumped about it. So look for that on Tuesday. We'll figure out what time. And then, just the vigil tonight at 9. If you guys want to pop in, like I said, Steve's guest hosting and Convo Couch is going to be popping in to talk about the fact that they were censored yet again. And I think that's all I have. Do you have anything else?
That's it for me.
Okay, guys. Thanks for hanging out with us again for another Facts on Friday. All. Yeah, we appreciate you. And as always, we'll be back next Friday, 4:00 Eastern. So don't miss that. And we will catch you next time. Bye, everybody.
Peace.